some other questions on it. Can you do exposure for a certain period of the day, i.e. 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. for schools?
Yeah, so the way safe system assessments are done. So we produced these fact sheets, which I'm going to show you shortly, because as I was marking assignments, I went, okay, we've just got to keep working a little bit on clarifying a few specific aspects here, which is fine. There's the whole purpose of a training course. We don't expect everybody to immediately get this. We've got a few fact sheets that'll help out in a few different specific scoring and categorizing things. But also there's one about how do you deal with those seasonal or very changing or unique circumstances? Like, I don't know, it's a road that's got a market, once a month on a Sunday, which gets thousands of pedestrians, but apart from that, it's very low pedestrian. So what do I use? Or, school time versus non-school time, or seasonal, maybe this is a tourist beachside town or something like that, and it's really pumping during summer and it's got nobody there during winter or something like that. So in a safe system assessment, this is more a process thing. You have a bit of flexibility. You can either do simply, it's basically two sort of assessments. You do an assessment during peak time and you do an assessment out of peak time. And then when you're thinking about how we alter the road environment, you're factoring that in. You're saying, okay, well, at this time of day, these are the risks, but at this time of the day, these are the risks. So we can then think about treatments that alleviate that by time, perhaps, such as times, speed zones, or closing roads at certain times of day, which is a very effective exposure reduction. But if you're going to open it during other times of the day, you lose that. So if you were to do one safe system assessment matrix during school time, and then you were to suggest some sort of closing of that road during school times, you've eliminated exposure at that time, but you still leave the risk at the other times of different things, but there may be different likelihood and severity. So that's one way to do it. But more often than not, it's just built in. The school in the area is built into the standard assessment matrix, and you take the kids crossing, if that's the most pedestrians, that's the number of pedestrians, and then you make some notes around it, particularly being school kids, and put your treatments in there accordingly.
Thank you.
So sorry, just to say that I love that treatment, and you can do it by a timed bollards or gates or the like. And I'm absolutely up for closing roads for vehicles during school times. Mm-hmm. And you can get the community on board with it, because you just go, it's kids, we're protecting the kids. And that is really hard for people to say, yeah, but we shouldn't really, as soon as they start into that, everybody's going, no, we can protect the kids.
There's a good example in an area in Melbourne that they've recently done that, where they've closed the roads at drop off and pick up times around the schools. So I should dig that out.
That's Dandenong City Council, I
think. Which one?
Dandenong did it in a couple of locations, but there's some more permanent ones as well.
Yes, yeah. Okay. The other questions, what about sight lines? There's a question here about sight lines, and does increasing sight lines actually increase speeds at intersections and therefore severity?
Yeah, so that question actually is a bigger question around us improving or reducing the likelihood of crashes associated, sight lines with, sealing shoulders on popular motorcycle routes is a classic, where you start to seal shoulders and you see some increased speeds is associated with this better, better road environment and the like. So specifically on sight lines, there's a couple of UK studies around the advantages you can get around reducing sight lines at roundabouts. Now it's a roundabout one particularly because you if you have massive swayed open sight lines, vehicles make their determination that it's all good for them to put the foot down, and they go through fast, and we see increased runoff road crashes. And if they've missed a vehicle, often a motorcyclist maybe in their A pillar, or a cyclist is in there out of the ordinary, or like we've just got this bad mix of high speed and entry into the roundabout. Now you can really alleviate that through geometric alterations in the approach of your roundabout with very good reverse curves, or even raised safety platforms, or the like on the approach. So you can dampen speed down to where you want through geometric alterations. But nonetheless, there was some evidence to show some good benefit at roundabouts. At other locations, not so much. As long as it's very clear that it's a priority route and that the side road is having to stop, opening up sight lines tends to provide road safety advantages from that perspective.
Thank you. So the other questions. Okay, so there was a question about, would you require a permanent fixed speed camera to enforce this? This was the variable speed signs you were talking about in the example. And there's a follow-up answer to that. Which was, when Dad responded about a drop in mean speed drops the tail speed as well, so it tightens it up. But I guess, would you need permanent fixed speed cameras?
No,
if you're doing variables.
No, you don't. You don't need permanent fixed speed cameras. I mean, there is an ability to enforce in them. The police working with, across a number of jurisdictions around Australia, been talking to police about the ability to enforce these, and they can. They certainly like to just use video as well as enforcement. So they've got the car going into the speed zone with it flashing on camera, and then then continue at inappropriate speed. So they can't argue that, oh, it wasn't flashing when it wasn't activated when I went past it, so it's not fair. So there certainly is ability to enforce. But as I mentioned, like we see significant reductions in speed and increased driver alertness, and that driver alertness is sort of the study that looked at a little bit at that had some decent term mounted cameras to look at braking patterns and the like of drivers, but you can make the assumption that a driver is more alert and awake if they've had that braking maneuver in certain time points after they've seen the speed zone. So anyway, the point being that without any enforcement, you get a benefit, and yes, if you did enforcement, you'll continue to see a little bit more benefit.
Now we're just going to do one more, if you know of anything here, and then we'll move on to the other stuff. Are there any studies that you know of, or any research in regards to if introducing speed limits increases driver frustration and therefore crashes, I guess? Do you know of anything there?
So yeah, I do. And so I recently updated the Austra's Guide to Road Safety Part 3, which is speed management speed limits, or it's now just safer speed or safe speeds. But in doing so, we collected heap of studies before and after, because the easiest way in my mind to dispel any myths around increased frustration causes crashes, or increased time to travel between two areas increases fatigue, and so more crashes will happen if you make the speed limit lower. That's a big one. Or the other one is, people say, oh no, if you drive at high speed, you're more alert and you stay concentrating, but if it's low speed, these are all just like, they're all myths, or they all might, some of them might have very, very tiny reductions in risk that are absolutely swamped by the increased risk of that higher speed, or vice versa. So the easiest way for that is to just collect comprehensive before and after studies of large speed limit reductions on roads, and vice versa, large studies on speed limit increases. So we just listed quite a few roads from around Australia, New Zealand, and around the world where speed limits had been reduced, and the outcome in terms of crashes and statistical significance of that, and the increases where speed limits had been increased and the resulting crashes. And it's pretty unanimous that you reduce the speed limit and you get a reduction in crashes. You increase the speed limit, you get an increase in crashes. And so all of those sorts of factors are just are kind of dispelled on that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Excellent. Ari's doing the finding. Terrific. Thanks, Ari. Price for you. Yeah. And big shout out to Robert for putting yourself out there and running through your site. That was great.
Oh, thanks. That really helped me out. Actually, it's really cool. Thanks.
Nice one.
Thanks, Robert. We're going to drop you away. That's good, Kathy, wasn't it? Good.
Yeah, marvelous. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
I think there's a lot of learning just sort of talking through one from that safe system assessment perspective. And as I often say with this course, it's sort of, we've designed it to build you into safe system assessing. And this first one about getting your clarity around exposure and likelihood and severity, it's hard and it's awkward, and you're sort of fumbling your way through that for now. And then it's going to get clearer and clearer. And by the end, we're hoping you've got all of that crystal clear and some other ways to think about these things. So I'm going to just...
I'm just doing a quick screen share. Sorry, Ken, just whilst you were getting yourself there ready. So for those people who are looking for, if you haven't done it yet, that's okay. There's still time to do it. But if you're looking for the feedback on it, so what you do is you just jump into your assignment, and all you need to do is scroll down. So this is just an example of one here. And there's some, if Ken's left some very long comments, just click on the plus and you'll see the commentary in there. So that's where you find your information. Sorry, that's all from me.
Good, thank you. I think before we let people get a coffee, I am going to just explain exposure a little bit more, and then I'll let people caffeinate up. Or maybe I should do it the other way around. They need caffeine to understand.
Everybody has to report back on exposure after the break.
No, I'm going to do it because it just fits in nicely as a spot before I launch into just the small amount of theory we wanted to cover today. Because we've been talking about this, exposure and likelihood and severity, and most people just struggle a little bit in getting their head around exposure, and that's understandable. But I just want you to think of exposure as numbers. And I mentioned this a couple of times, so I'm mentioning it again. Just think of it as volume, numbers, number of vehicles, number of pedestrians, number of cyclists, all right? One that is particularly relevant, I think, is, say we've got a bit of road like that, and we've got pedestrians that cross the road there, okay? Our exposure there is based on the number of pedestrians crossing. Okay. If you then propose to do curb build outs or curb outstands, or right, you lessen the distance to cross. Okay. In a safe system assessment, that is a likelihood reduction. Okay. We have not changed the number of pedestrians that are crossing. Thus, we have not changed the exposure. We've changed the chance of a crash because they're out there for less time. And the reason I brought that one up particularly is because before the safe system assessment and the extraction of exposure from likelihood, they were built together, we would have talked about that as exposure in road safety analysis for many years. So there's a terminology confusion there, but that is likelihood. And the reason for that is that when we start to put numbers to these and quantify these, we don't want to double count. We don't want to double count benefit or double count risk. And so we're trying to segment them out. So I hope that helps you. Just think numbers when we're talking about exposure. And when we get to the extreme ends of it and we're able to block off, well, in this case, a level crossing, we know that we've eliminated the exposure of vehicle to train crashes. So there's none, the numbers are 0. And likewise, if we've moved the bikes or pedestrians away from the vehicles, there are, the number of those pedestrians and cyclists exposed to vehicle crashes is lower or 0. And so we've removed the number, the conflict numbers. So hopefully that helps it. Here's a actual sort of definition if you need it. AADT, side road traffic volumes, number of motorcyclists, cyclists, pedestrians walking along. So I hope that's helpful. Now, Kathy, I'll get you to put these fact sheets into the learning management system because over time, we have identified quite a number of things that Austroads and Okakatahi haven't provided specific guidance on and no direction. And so working with industry and others, we've come to a way that we could think about this and pop that down. Now, hopefully, if Austroads gets to doing a version 2 of the Safe System Assessment Framework, or there's further supplementary guidance provided by Okakatahi, this might be included. But this tries to address some of those curly questions around scoring associated with even things like intersections. How do you score an intersection? Is it do you add the two? Do you multiply the two volumes? Do you multiply them and then square root the product? Like, there's many ways people could get to that. So we've explained why adding has been the one that people have chosen. Thinking about bicycle facilities and when does a bicycle facility influence exposure or likelihood or severity, and then how do you do a long route project? Well, how do you assess something if you've got many intersections and along a route? And so some explanation around that. And we also talk then in there a bit about those seasonal or very altered times. So they might be helpful as you get into the depths and the specifics. Yeah. I just was looking at some questions there. Okay, before we get into what we're going to cover this module, I think it is that coffee time, and then I'll have a look at the chat and see if there's anything to cover or pop your questions in as we go. So 4 minutes back, and we'll whip through a little bit more content. Thanks for that. So the question came in there just around level crossing one, and it's really, yeah, maybe I need to alter this photo, use a different photo, because it kind of looks like you can still get in there. There is actually a big amount of dirt on this side as well, which you can't see, and so you can't actually drive into that area. You can probably walk into it. Exposure for pedestrians is probably different, but it's a little bit of a different view there. So sorry about that. Actually, Sam, maybe this is a question for you, because you do a lot of the assessment of railway level crossings around New Zealand using the assessment model, ALCAM, is it?
That's right.
And so is exposures factored into that within the model, isn't it? Very heavily.
That's right. Essentially, the way you've been describing it now, it's basically the exposure of the traffic going over and the number of trains coming along. It's all built into the ALCAM model. And then, the severity is pretty easy on ALCAM, because if a train hits you, there's not much else you can do, really.
And that's right. So in a safe system assessment, if we have a level crossing, we treat it like any other. So you're thinking about that exposure being the number of vehicles and number of trains, and then you think about the likelihood based on all the factors, and that's where ALCAM just has a huge raft of factors, doesn't it, for likelihood, and then severity is going to be at your maximum end because it's a train. Yeah, thanks, Seth. Okay. So hopefully that's helped people. Please do keep your questions coming in. Kathy will be behind the scenes, but and maybe also Sam will be able to answer a few right away if there's anything specific. Okay, so what we want to do before we just get into the very much mechanics of writing out the scoring of a safe system assessment and where you write things and how you determine the number and the like, is just sort of round off our thinking about the safe system and contextualizing projects and the like by talking about the One Network framework, movement in place thinking, and why that's kind of important within a safe system assessment, and ensuring that we really have a good grasp on pedestrians and cyclists and motorcyclists and what aligns highly with safe system principles and what is not so good, and the risk factors associated with exposure, likelihood and severity for vulnerable road user groups. And then that sets us up beautifully for next session. Okay, so we will then be able to dive into the specifics of filling out the forms and the like. Now, One Network framework, movement in place, is something that some of you are absolute experts on, and in fact probably wrote some of the guidance and documentation and for Wakatahi and for AT and for others. And by no means within a safe system assessment do you need to be an absolute expert in it. But the reason we want to understand like the context of a project within its strategic objectives for that network is not really particularly for the assessment of a proposal. It's for the recommendations that we make, because you can achieve very good alignment with safe system principles in many different ways, but it comes at the cost of one thing or another sometimes. And that it comes at the cost of the time it takes vehicles to move through an area, or time it takes cyclists to move through an area, or it could come at the cost of the place, the feeling of place in an area, the community interaction, trading, socializing in that area. So let me explain that a little bit, just using some of the simple movement in place, One Network framework style thinking. And as I say, I mean, I'm not I'm not an expert in this stuff. I have enough knowledge to be able to make it useful for road safety assessments and contextualizing projects and the like, but you can reach out to some just wonderful people who are immersed in this style of stuff to really get that understanding. But the reason from a road safety perspective we want to understand it, as I mentioned, is to ensure that what we are recommending to get us to our high safe system alignment also aligns with strategic objectives of that area. And the basics of this, which I'm now really sort of reminding people of some of the basics. You've got movement function. So a road or street can have a movement function, and that's movement of people and goods. It's not like movement of cars. Okay, it's movement of people and goods in whatever mode that they are in. And then you've got place. And place is that, as I mentioned before, it's a metric of community interaction, trade, socialization, vibrance, and the like. So your roads and streets get categorized into these. And then we know that if you have a transit corridor, you're going to try to keep the speeds of whatever vehicles you have using that, be that bikes or public transport or cars or trucks. You're going to try to keep it moving along, because this is all about movement. It's not about people hanging out, having a coffee, socializing in these areas. And down here, it's the opposite, isn't it? We want that. We're not concerned about moving vehicles and goods, people and goods through there. We're concerned about ensuring we hold as much place value as we possibly can in that area, and make it a very wonderful place to hang out and to trade and interact. So you've got these sort of rural and urban ones, and there's lots more to this. But when you're embarking on a safe system assessment, talking to the project team and potentially strategic planners for the council or Whakatahi or the other area to understand, what are they trying to achieve out of this? Where does it fit within the strategic framework? What are the movement and place categorizations of this? Helps you then with those recommendations. So if you're down in civic spaces, we know we're into sort of these environments where we can look for safe system aligned measures that also give us that ability to trade, to interact, and to have an area where people congregate. It was interesting with our sort of COVID pop-up areas, which is a picture of a bit of pop-up stuff there, that we saw a lot more embracement of people trying to move areas further into these civic spaces or the like. But let's do a little exercise, get people popping down their thoughts. An artistic impression here, and always take them with a grain of salt. But we've got an area, and if we were to be looking at that and coming up with recommendations in our safe system assessment, so putting aside we've done our actual assessment, now we're trying to suggest how this area could be improved for alignment with safe system principles. But also, if we've identified it's in that civic space area, this has low movement function but high place function, or we're aspiring to move it into that category, I want you to give me in a second some recommendations or some changes we could make here, or things we could suggest. But I also want you to categorize that into exposure or likelihood or severity or a combination, just to keep us practicing that exposure, likelihood, and severity thinking. So, you might write down there, I don't know, more lighting, brackets L for likelihood. Now, again, why would you do that in this cartoon? But that's all right. That was me just giving an example. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to have a think about that. Pop a few down there. Remember, we're in that civic space, the most place and the least movement aspiration for the area. Okay. So I'm seeing some absolutely wonderful ideas coming in here. So thank you. And again, this group just superb at interaction and putting ideas down and thinking about it. I'm just going to run through and pick a couple to talk to. And what I'm seeing there, everything I'm seeing has ability to improve alignment with safe system principles, to make things better from that perspective. Some of them have more leverage in terms of improving place amenity than others, or place value than others. And so I might talk a little bit to that as well. So okay. So the first one I think I want to talk to here, and a prize, I think, for Anne-Marie here, because removal of vehicles from the area, exposure, that is always the place to start. If somebody says it's his high place value area, right, that's where we want to go. That is our ultimate in safe system treatment, and it's our ultimate in place. Like, it just ticks all the boxes. Okay, so it's a great place to start. Now, most of the times there's challenges with that, but we want to be sort of starting there, because everything else then starts to have a little bit of an erosion in the place value. Okay, that's all right. It's the practical realities of managing most networks, but let's start with the ultimate, and then we work our way back. So quite a few people came in there about things of reducing the speed limit reductions and local area traffic management. This is going to reduce the likelihood and severity of crashes, and raise tables and these sort of things. And they're absolutely wonderful, and they're going to give us good safe system alignment, and they're going to increase the place value of the area as well. So that's good. If we put things to impede pedestrians crossing at specific locations, like fences, so pedestrian fences in the middle or on the sides of the roads, okay, that might give us better alignment with safe system principles, but it comes at the cost significantly of the place value of the area. So that's a real classic of where, if you're doing things to stop permeability for pedestrians and the like, you are very much dictating that road is a movement corridor. And you say, no, pedestrians, you're, getting in the way, and we've got to keep the vehicles moving through here, right? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not judging an area for that, like as in that's a bad thing, if that road has been thought about strategically as a movement corridor. Okay, that's the way we do it. But as soon as you've said it's priority here is place, it's not the way we want to see safe system applied in those areas. That's to a degree the same when you designate crossing points. So a designated crossing here, or signalized crossing there, or the like, is saying this is a movement corridor, right? And we have to keep that movement corridor going, and the pedestrians can cross in these particular locations. So you have start to pare back your place value as you do that, right? Again, segregation of road users, so dedicated bus lanes, dedicated cycle lanes, and the like. Those are starting to increase movement function through the area. Now, remember, movement is movement of buses, or movement of bikes, or movement of vehicles or trucks or the like. So it's elevating movement, but we do most of the time find us in this area where we're still requiring movement through these streets and roads of different vehicle modes. So you end up finding yourself in this somewhat balance. Any sort of like pedestrian overpasses or or anything like that are very much movement corridor related. And okay, so some people have said, okay, make the footpaths wider, and that's a lovely way to increase a bit of place value there, improve alignment with safe system principles. And I'm really happy to see people are talking about that as a likelihood factor, from not saying that that's exposure, because we just talked about that example earlier. So wonderful work there. Now, I'm going to give Alan a prize here on this sort of last one that came in, because and it's not necessarily that one way is like what I think is a really great aligned safe system treatment. I mean, it can have some significant advantage in different ways. It's the categorization of it to likelihood is really superb thinking in terms of categorization, because I get a lot of people who will talk about a one way and immediately talk about exposure. And that's not the case unless you have some traffic modeling or data to show that, well, we're going to make it one way and, you know, reduce the number of lanes, and it's going to, you know, significantly pull back the number of vehicles through there. And the number of vehicles is the exposure. One weighing a system can often give you a reduction in the likelihood of crashes, because you know, pedestrians crossing are always, you know, only having to look the one way. We've got vehicles entering and exiting all the one way, and it can clean up a few of the challenges of multi-direction. The severity tends to stay about the same on crashes. I mean, especially with pedestrians and cyclists, it's a pedestrian cycle crash, and the severity is going to be based on the speed, basically. So yeah, great categorization there. So I think that's all I'll talk to on that one, and some artistic impressions, just for fun, out of some, this is actually US guidance, but you can see you can immediately see it's more of a place for people there to hang out, trade, socialize, play, have a coffee. You can see it's going to be safer. You're going to get less vehicles through there. So your exposure will be low, but being able to quantify that's interesting. I don't particularly think they need that crossing point. I think the whole area as a shared zone is fine, but I think you get the point. As movement demanding increases, or your strategic planners are talking about more movement, yeah, as I mentioned, you sort of segregation of mode and creating those throughputs through mode has very good safe system alignment, and you're still able to maintain pretty good place value when you do this from those, as you can see there in that sort of artistic impression. Now, you know, you take these with a grain of salt, and it's hard and messy to actually move through and get these sorts of things. But if you can see them as aspirations and work towards them, it's good and it's helpful in our thinking about recommendations. So I'll keep us moving along. We've got just about half an hour to go. Local streets in this categorization, or areas you talk about, like, there's a whole lot of different terms around the world for how people categorize movement and place, or link and place, and the area. The principles are really the important ones. So at these sort of lowish place value, low movement areas, local streets tend to be that, residential streets and the like. You really start to think about the safe system alignment through management of speed, because we're able to take advantage of these lower movement requirements. So vehicle speeds can significantly be reduced, and that's, you know, giving our safety outcome from that perspective. You're not going to do things to, in any way, shape or form, increase vehicle travel speeds through there in a safe manner, because the well, the importance of that is not there. And you do erode other social benefits and, you know, active transport choices and those sorts of things. So this is a very popular, like a very populated sort of residential street cartoon, but you know, again, we see slowing of vehicles significantly through this because the movement through that area of people and goods is not important. It's minor access, and we can slow vehicles down. The challenges start to really begin. Like, and I always talk about this. It's easy up here, and it's easy down here, and generally kind of easy in there. It's up at this end where it's just really hard. It's really hard because people are asking everything from a corridor. They want it to be the public transport priority. They want vehicles to move through there quickly. They want everybody to be safe, and they want it to be a, you know, vibrant place and where people can hang out, and it becomes a real challenge. I always will start in a safe system assessment and try to push strategic planners or project teams and say, no, give me something to work with here. Tell me, are you wanting to go this way, or are you wanting to go this way? Oh, it's a bit harder. Blue out. Are you wanting to go this way? Where? Tell me, give me something. Because as soon as they're able to start to do that, it really helps you free up in how you're going to alter and or suggest altering this network. But sometimes it's very hard. So we'll do this one very quickly. We're getting some Wally advice in the chat. This one, like, if, for example, you've got a road here and we say, well, it's really aspiring to actually sit in the city hubs type area up there in the pink. It's currently, you know, high traffic volume. It's got a lot of pet activity. It's got pedestrian overpasses, and you can see that. I mean, what sort of alterations, again, with your exposure likelihood and severity, quite quickly here, chuck a few ideas in on this type of environment, sitting in a very different categorization there. So any thoughts on that? Yeah, so I'll
Ooh, what's one of those fancy Brazilian bus stops?
I'm not 100% sure what is meant there, but is that?
That's brilliant, Jenny. You could write anything. One of those fancy Ukraine, oh no, not Ukraine. Anyway, you know what I mean? You could just about write anything. People go, oh, sounds good. You got my attention.
Fancy Azerbaijani roundabouts. Yeah. I wonder if it's a floating bus stop, which I'm still scratching my head about. If anybody's got any research or data around floating bus stop, because floating bus stops we know are good for cyclists, but then when there's a lot of concern around pedestrians walking across the, you know, being forced to walk across the cycle lane and the dangers associated with that, and yeah. I can't make a good determination. Oh, it's one on my list to investigate. Yeah, it's the floating one.
So question, yeah, there is an overhead walkway here.
At the moment there is, yeah, and you can't see it on the screen. Anyway, I'm going to just, again, like look through some of the wonderful comments that are coming in. And Okay, so people there are talking about separation of mode, which is a good, gets us good safe system alignment, keeps the movement corridor going, and can have some assistance on place. There's a lot of talk about the pedestrian overpass, and then people talking about barriering off and fencing off the road to make and force pedestrians to use that overpass. I want to say like that is a movement focused treatment. Now, because we're trying to achieve here the very challenging thing of movement and place, okay, I would opt out of that that pedestrian overpass, and that, yeah, the reason for that is, yeah, it's just a focused movement corridor. When you have pedestrian overpasses, you've lost a lot of your place value. Sure, there's some amazing things that could be done with your overpass being a place in its whole own right and having parks up there and shops and things, and then you've moved your place up to the elevated structure, and that's all good. But in most cases, if you're trying to create place, it's very hard to do it with pedestrian overpass facilities. I think Dan's comment's good as well. In fact, prize-worthy, because it's very much something I would want people analysing from a road safety perspective with fences or barriers or systems to try to corral pedestrians. Is your danger to pedestrians that don't like that idea and want to get to where they were going on their desire line anyway, and will walk on the road, and we can create issues. So that's a very site by site specific analysis to be done. But purely back to our movement in place categorization, keeping everything at grade is going to be, and lower vehicle speeds is going to get us our movement requirements and have much more place value associated with it. Okay, so let's have a look what the artists have done here. Take everything on artist impressions with a grain of salt, as you usually do, but I think the overarching sort of look and feel of it in that sort of large carriageway style thing gives us that movement function through different modes. Yes, it's probably not going to be as good for cars to get through there. But in terms of getting people and goods through there, I think we're still achieving our requirements at reasonable speeds. You can see the increased place value of the area, and the safe system alignment is fairly clear and obvious with raised intersection separation, like we do see this sort of movement towards these areas that maintain a movement function of people and goods, and are having some place value. Maybe we could do a little bit better, but I think we're starting to see that play out on the New Zealand road network more and more. In Christchurch here, and you can see separated facilities, lower speeds of vehicles, but still plenty of opportunity to move people and goods through the area. Now, you may question, can we go further into the place and actually start to really limit movement through these areas of vehicles and the like? But if everybody's prioritising everything, then that's what it is. And of course, signalised intersections do often play out in these sorts of environments, and I do remind that protected intersections are really very well aligned with safe system principles for reducing the likelihood and severity of crashes, where we have the vehicles making that turn where there's great sight lines. Now, this course, I'm not going into a lot of the details of anything associated with infrastructure design or specifics and the like, because we're just setting up a set of principles for you to look at any area. But these sorts of features tend to align really well with what we're trying to achieve there. Then when we get into the urban connectors or transit corridors, somebody's made a distinct choice to move people and goods through that area at speed. Now, okay, the picture I've got there is of vehicles, but it could just as well be of a cycleway, dedicated cycleway, or the like. But you're going to try to maintain some speed through there. And this is where you start to get into those things that we talked about with, possibly pedestrian overpasses, possibly starting to look at, fencing off areas from pedestrians crossing, congregating, and the like, because a distinct choice has been made. Yeah, sometimes people get annoyed at this, but if we're going to manage our whole transport network, some of the roads are going to be transit corridors, and thus we should try not to think that we're going to do everything for that corridor. And we do still need to be very conscious that even though it's a movement corridor, that areas of conflict above our safe system tolerable thresholds need to be addressed, such as our large signalized intersection. And we need to bring speeds within tolerable levels within these locations, as you saw with our raised intersections and those sorts of facilities and features. I think people thought Wally was asleep or something, but he's still here, don't worry. Okay, so cyclists and pedestrians, obviously the most vulnerable road users, and we're talking, severe injury risks, even around that 20 kilometers per hour. And then as we saw, 30 kilometers per hour is where it really kicks up really badly. And young and old, even more vulnerable. I mean, in a safe system assessment, you may factor a little bit of that into your assessment, but it's probably not enough to make major significant changes. Old people obviously can't handle forces anywhere near what younger people can. Young people actually withstand a lot of force. However, often the mechanics of crashes are young people being struck in more vulnerable parts of their body, head especially. So thinking about managing speeds down around that 20 kilometers per hour where pedestrian volumes are significant is important, and otherwise trying to separate it. And that sounds simple, but it's very challenging. But separated facilities, Copenhagen style lanes, and I've got pictures on this presentation from all over Australia, New Zealand, and around the world, of different sort of ways to think about it. But the principles are there that we are separating those modes. Now, remember, I had a full fact sheet on, is this sort of treatment going to impact exposure or likelihood or severity? Because it gets a little bit challenging to do that. If there's no access points and you've done that, and at the mid block, I would say that's exposure. If you've got intersections, you've got access points, I would say it's likelihood, because you've still got the chance of vehicle to cyclist crash, but you've lessened the likelihood of it for a number of reasons. And roundabouts, of course, I'd like to show the way you can continue to maintain those wonderful safe system features of a roundabout, and all the different benefits, but also providing facilities that reduce the likelihood and severity of crashes involving pedestrians and cyclists, such as these protected roundabouts, as you can sort of see there, with features around it, slowing vehicles at conflict points, reducing the likelihood of crashes and the severity of crashes at these locations. And also, this is a wonderful place-making feature, but also movement feature for those other categories, which are often forgotten, which is pedestrians and cyclists. They are movement. They require their movement function as well. And if you're prioritizing those modes in different areas or different streets or roads, we should be catering for that. And it gets challenging and murky when you get bigger, and we see things very challenging pedestrians and cyclists through multi-lane roundabouts, and I don't think anybody in industry's got this right without spending a massive amount of money, which I think we should be doing often with pedestrian and cyclist underpasses over the multi-lanes. But this is where we're getting stuck in trying to do, multimodal shares. But these ideas are decent, where you actually create priority for pedestrians and cyclists through these sections, and then I'd like to see these go under if you can. But if not, what we're trying to do is reduce the likelihood of crashes as much as possible through squared up and places to wait. From a active transport use perspective, it's not great. Like, it's going to very much limit. You're not going to have old people crossing the road here, that's for sure. So you've got to factor that into your thinking, and it's going to, cyclists. It's only going to be fairly confident cyclists that are going to dart across multi lanes of traffic there. So limitations there. So thinking about safe system alignment for cyclists, I just touch on cyclists, pedestrians, and motorcyclists before we end up here. Is from that tolerance to physical force perspective, we think about lane sharing at low speeds. We think then about physical separation as we increase above, say, 30. This is an adaptation of a Dutch diagram. And you can use features as curbing, or you can use parking to do that separation. And then in these higher speed environments, it's the physical separation. So we've sort of eliminated exposure in these ones, and we've really worked here on likelihood in these ones, and down here we've addressed severity. Pedestrians, and I just have this, if we've got an area that has enough pedestrian activity, or we're aspiring to enough pedestrian activity to prioritize pedestrians, it's imperative that we address the severity of crashes at that location. And so I can't see any environment where it's acceptable to have an at-grade pedestrian crossing, so a zebra crossing, without some speed management measures. If the area itself is very well speed calmed and the speed on the approach to these is low, fine. But if the speeds are above that 30 kilometers per hour, speed calming measures have to be put in place to give us the severity reduction. And we know that raised crossing there, for example, is highly aligned with safe system principles, because we know there's a reduction in the likelihood of crashes and severity of crashes. However, if we were to make that a zebra crossing, just a zebra crossing, we actually know that we've eliminated severity reduction out of it, and likelihood is highly questionable, because pedestrians are less sort of looking for vehicles because they've got priority, and some vehicles are going through at speed still. So I talk unashamedly that a zebra crossing is not a road safety feature. Okay, it may encourage more people to walk and that's good. But from a pure death and serious injury to your community perspective, it is not a road safety feature. Raising it like this is like up at 70% reduction in death and serious injury for pedestrians. Now, there's all sorts of things we could talk about raised crossing and raised crossing design, and things that are going to enhance, lessen the likelihood even further with appropriate lighting and sight distance on the approach. And then there's your civil characteristics around how do you do your drainage and when do you use refuges and not, and the like. So huge amount packed into that. But from a pure safe system assessment perspective, you're going to take all of that sort of thinking and looking into it to help you analyze the likelihood of crashes. And then the severity of crashes, you're thinking about, well, what speed now a vehicle is going to hit pedestrians? And are we within ranges we see as tolerable and acceptable? And I just thought that a nice analogy on pedestrian, particularly pedestrian safe system alignment, fits in here. And I'll probably end this very shortly. We kind of know what a safe system road environment is for pedestrians, or a very highly aligned one. Let me give you this example here. This is in Adelaide. So I've jumped over to Adelaide now. This is a while back, but it's a 60km/h road. But because there were some workers doing work in the island here, the speed limit went down to 25 km an hour, roadwork speed limit in South Australia. Okay, maybe New Zealand, we're going to go to 40, but nonetheless, there's a speed limit reduction and barrier systems, protection from that perspective. And the workers work away. They finish their work after a week or whatever it was, and the barriers are removed, speed limit goes up to 60 km an hour. And we have about 3,000 pedestrians a day waiting to cross at that exact location where the workers were. So for some reason, we understand the vulnerability of the workers and that vehicles are going to make mistakes and they're going to leave the road and they need to be slower and the like. But we afford that level of protection to the workers. But as soon as it comes to the general public, well, it's on them to protect themselves. And we need to sort of push and alter that. Now, some people say to me, well, oh, but the workers are focusing on the work and not the, not the traffic. And I say, well, the pedestrians are focusing on their phone and not the traffic. Like they're intoxicated and all sorts of things. So we kind of know what the theoretical way to reduce risk is. It's just we don't afford that level of protection to the public. So we're trying to move that and alter that. And I do often say, if you need an elevator pitch on safe system and tell people, what is it very quickly, it's to say, think about the safety of workers interacting with the road environment and afford that level of safety culture to the entire community. And it's a long way to go, but at a safety culture perspective, that's what we would like to be aspiring to. And interestingly, it does play out pretty amazingly. If you're up in, you've got a big mine site, like a massive mine site, and you're driving along a road, and it might be 100 km/h till you get to the gate for the mines, massive area that they are. And you go through the gate, and the speed limit usually is dropped to about 50. And you still might have to drive 5 km or 10 km to get to the actual area you're going. And it's exactly the same road that you came in on, right? It's been, exactly the same. But because you're in their area and they've done an actual risk assessment, there's no possible way they're going to let you drive at 100 km/h, right? So we know the risk. It's just the way we've evolved to push all of the safety responsibility on the individuals rather than trying to create this system that is safer.
Ken, are you suggesting concrete barriers in city centres?
Well, it depends what you've done in terms of strategic assessment of it. If it's been assessed that this corridor here is the movement corridor and not a place function, then possibly you do that and you create some very specific dedicated crossing points that have lower speed, but it's not going to be a great place. So I wouldn't say that you'd be doing that in major urban cities because people are demanding place as well. But there's many ways to get us to safe system alignment. And yeah, I've got a number of different things here to talk about associated with just us getting better alignment with safe system principles for pedestrians and cyclists in these more urban environments. Raised intersections play a huge role in this, reducing the likelihood and severity of crashes. Ensure you think about, specific design characteristics. We don't have time to go into it, but one I always note to people is you tend to remove your curb when you raise an intersection, and that can cause a little bit of trouble with vehicles turning. So some sort of way to stop vehicles tracking over pedestrian areas is important, but that's a little specific aside. Raised thresholds, reducing likelihood and severity of those crossing points, and even just speed limit reduction. So taking a default speed limit from 60 to 50, you can see the step change you get in a year. Speed limits are very important. They continue to work. So motorcyclists, and anybody who's done the audit course with me knows I talk about sight, surface, signs, strike, and speed. And the first three there are addressing the likelihood of crashes. Strike is the severity of crashes, and speed is both likelihood and severity of crashes. And there's been a release of a bit more analysis around the severity of motorcycle crashes, and I'll point you to this and some fairly recent research that's been released showing that motorcyclists actually up from pedestrians and cyclists, which in the past we just said severity of crashes with motorcyclists is going to be the same as pedestrians or cyclists because we don't have better data on that. We do now, but it is not as good as for cars. So motorcyclists sit somewhere between pedestrians and cyclists and vehicles. And I think most people would have logically come to that conclusion, but it's good we've got a bit of data to back that up. So just thinking about there's increased likelihood of crashes for motorcyclists because they're hidden behind trees or signal controller boxes or smaller objects. The surface is really important associated with the likelihood of crashes because especially of that lean of a rider and there's too small contact patches and braking and riders being susceptible to the surface issues like potholes, ruts, flushing, even steel plates and other things. So as you assess, you're looking at those and factoring them into the likelihood of crashes. Motorcyclists very attuned to signage and appropriate warning sign and guiding and informing and the like, so we can get reductions in likelihood by signage, and they're one of the road users we get the most benefit in terms of reduction of likelihood from correct, consistent and appropriate signage, and if you need to, warning riders specifically of hazards and the like. We talked about strike there for motorcyclists. The tolerance to physical force sort of, maxes out around that 50. So here you see European crash tests at 60 kilometers per hour for motorcycle crash test dummy into posts and underrun protection. And they're survivable where we redirect energy, but at a point source stop hazard is unsurvivable. The forces cannot be survived when striking upright single point source hazards. You need to redirect, but we can. Underrun protection is probably a great example for motorcyclists of that severity reduction technique. And of course, speed through speed limits, advisory speed, local area traffic management, any way to manage speed is going to be effective for motorcyclists as it is for other road users through both reduction in the likelihood and severity of crashes. So we'll pick up next time and we're jumping into the mechanics of the safe system assessment, because I think we're all in a really nice spot now where we can understand, okay, that's kind of what we're trying to achieve. Now let's work out exactly how we score the existing road, we score designs, and we make appropriate recommendations. And that's where we'll pick up next session. Anything I missed there, Kathy?
Just two quick ones, if you can, Ken. Earlier question about, is the way cycle treatments are treated depending on the terrain? For example, separated if uphill, but combined cars, cycles if downhill?
I mean, yes, it's very site specific on that sort of stuff. That is a bit of thinking more in your touring route style stuff, which is good because it's about speed, you know, bit of differential in speed and the like. But I think it's a bit more, it's usually a bit more complicated than that.
And a question that came through earlier, can you undertake a safe system assessment for an area-wide treatment, or would that be similar to assessing a route?
You can do it for an area-wide treatment. I'll talk a little bit more about the scalability and you know, the way you can look at these different safe system assessments in a later module, as I will for the question Chris has just popped in there about, you know, specifically what's the Wakatahi guidance versus Austroads guidance and are there differences?
Thank you, Ken. I just wanted to quickly show people. So those safe system assessment fact sheets are in the resources section, and it just takes you a link to our website. So if we make any changes to them or anything like that, they the latest versions are up here. So that's it, I think, from us. And if you haven't done your assignment, please send that through. And also if you, and there will be a quiz, and two Wallies sounds good for this week, or three, 2 or 3.
Yeah, there's a little bit of tolerance. Thanks for popping in, Sam, as well. And thank you, Kathy. We've got to let people go. It's picked over the hour.
Absolutely. See you later.
Everyone. Thanks, Ken.
Bye.